Hey, Carl. Good evening. It's good to see you again.
Hey,
And
Randy. It's good to be
looking,
seen.
look, yeah, looking forward to a certain softball matchup coming up this next week, later on this week.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, tomorrow night
well,
starts up.
I gotta give you this then.
I did see Jay Will, who I love watching his daughter, unfortunately went to pull against her, but I saw Jay Will, a Texas fan, was trying to get a picture with him last night, and she was doing hook 'em. He was trying to teach her to do guns up, so they were going back and forth. It's pretty good. He's as much entertainment as watching the softball game, but I think it's going to be a good series again this year, so I'm excited about it.
Yeah. I did hear today on one report that women's NC2A softball the is up in terms of viewership 64% over last year. It's a
It's a
hot
fun product.
commodity. It
If
is.
you,
It is.
I played baseball my whole life, that was my sport. I love to watch baseball in person.
Mhm.
You almost can't pay me enough. If Texas makes it into the College World Series, I might watch baseball, but it's hard to pay me enough to watch baseball on television. But softball, man, other than college football right now, it's hard to argue with the product they're putting on the field. It's fast paced, it's fun. Those girls are athletes.
That's right, and, they're not concerned about going after one another.
That's been funny too, and a lot of the talk and the chatter is, I don't think that's hurt their product. Little WWE never hurts anybody.
Absolutely,
As we
absolutely.
talked, I'm gonna see if I can reach out to Sark though, and my buddy Walter knows Joey McGuire, so we'll see if we can set up those two throwing out the first pitch. I thought since they won't actually play in football, maybe we can get a first pitch thrown out between those two or something.
Yeah,
So we'll see.
maybe Sark could pitch it to maybe, McGuire could play catcher, and, there you
Yeah,
go.
that'd be good. I think that'd be fun. Maybe Cody can be the umpire or something. That'd be great.
Oh, well, if
All
Sark was
right.
pitching, we guarantee it would end up being a ball if Cody was, the umpire, so
Oh, way outside. Yeah, 100%.
well, let me tell you, as we've said many times on these podcasts, we both, have a tremendous interest in the political realm, even though we may not always understand it, and sometimes it will frustrate us. But in sitting back and watching all the things that have been transpiring, and this is not just recently, but really for me, over the last three, maybe four administrations. One of the things that I was taught, again, because I went to school many, many years ago, and they actually taught social studies, and you were taught a little bit about how the government is supposed to work. And one of the things that I always remember is that we had three branches of government and that they were set up by the our constitutional founders to make sure that there was a balance of power within our government. And I have a real concern. I will tell you, with all the frustration that I have sometimes with politics in the US and decisions that are made and policies that are put forward, I have always held to our Constitution is just too strong. The institutions are really stronger than we sometimes want to admit. And regardless of how insane things may get, I've always had tremendous confidence that our nation, our republic will stand in all circumstances. However, I will tell you this. I believe that the greatest threat to our nation is not China, it's not Russia, it's not AI. It is an imbalance in the three branches of our government. I know that constitutionally they're set up in such a way that there is supposed to always be, is supposed to guarantee a balance of power. But it seems to me, Carl, that we're taking an awful lot of liberties. And I'm talking about at the Supreme Court level, at the administrative level, at the congressional level, that go far beyond what was the intention of the framers of the Constitution. And it is as though there is a concerted effort in all three of those branches of government to shift the balance of power more to their side. And I find that extraordinarily frightening if they're able to pull that off. And so I don't know, am I worried about something that shouldn't be worried about? Are you seeing any of the same things? Is there anything that we can do to bring things back into the kind of balance that I believe the framers of the Constitution intended, because that does concern me tremendously. If the greatest amount of power and influence were to fall with Congress, or to fall with the Supreme Court, or to fall with the president, I think we're in serious, serious trouble as a nation. Uh, I don't know. What do you think?
So the short answers to your two questions are yes and yes. I do think there's a problem, and yes, I do think there's a fix. And I think the whole, if you envision the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, I think they've all rotated like 45 degrees, and they're all a little bit out of their chair and kind of in their neighbor's chair. They're halfway between where they're supposed to be and infringing on their neighbor. I think one of the questions is who started it? What's the chicken? What's the egg? You know, whose fault is it? Which one of the three overreached or gave up power? So I want to hit that a little bit. I do think there's some most things we talk about are very simple on this podcast, and then in execution they're dang near impossible. So I think there's some simple solutions how to make them actually happen. That's a different discussion. And I think you're right. I mean, the founders, it sounds like I'm saying the founders weren't smart. That's not what I'm saying. But oftentimes I do say, I don't think they were, these fortune tellers who knew what was going to happen in the future. They were simply dealing with King George III, and
Right,
so they knew what that looked like. So they weren't writing this thing that, hey, in 250 years, this thing may happen. They're writing from, here's what's happened over the last number of years. We want to put a system in place together that will curtail that. That said, I think they've done a phenomenal job. We've made it
right.
249 years, and we were 6 or 8 weeks short of making it to 250 years. So still the best, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinions, experiment in self-government. And it's complicated. I mean, it's funny. Each one of these we do, I think I know a little bit about it. And I too, when it was allowed to teach civics and social studies and all those history in school before they outlawed such things, I had that as well. Thought I knew a lot about it, and like normal, the more I think I know, the dumber I get, the more I research. So I think it's intriguing. And I mentioned I was listening to Sean Ryan and Megan Kelly this morning, and they actually talked a little bit about this. It was funny. And Megan brought up something that I had actually found during my research last night, and I heard her say the same thing today. And you said something earlier that I think the framers did intend for one of the three to be the most powerful. It was definitely not the executive branch, and it was not the judicial branch.
Right.
It was the legislative branch. And it's funny, Megan said exactly something I saw. It's funny that Article 1 deals with Congress, Article 2 deals with the president, and it wasn't an accident which one was first. And I think if you look, I mean, they clearly were afraid of executive power. They weren't afraid of legislative power because they believed that represented the people. That's what they were trying to do, is build a government, of the people. The Constitution, when you look at it, it was designed where the executive branch was pretty well constrained. The legislative branch is pretty powerful. A lot of checks and balances that you mentioned. And here's where I think it kind of fell apart. So the legislature, in theory, controls spending, writes the laws, declares war, oversees government, and represents the people directly. Well, go all the way back to our Iran and, digging in, and what did we say there were, 3 or 4 wars ever that were declared by Congress? So
Right, right, right.
clearly they gave that up, and because last time I checked, we've had a lot more conflicts and wars than 3 or 4. Spending, there's the $1.8 billion or whatever it is right now, slush fund that Trump's got to right wrongs of people that are sued. Congress didn't approve that. I mean, you just go down the list of spending that is happening, and so who gave up what? And, I don't know how Congress can enforce some of this, but forcing the president to deliver an annual budget, and not one that the president gets everything they want, but here's the budget. We're going to review it. But what's happened is, and I don't know how, again, I don't know if they send the Capitol Police to collect or what. That gets to be weird. Is how do you pull back the power of a executive branch that's overstepping? And in all my stuff, I'm not going to talk much about the Supreme Court because I think they're kind of a victim of what's happened, and they've pulled some
Mhm.
power, but I don't think they're necessarily the problem. I think because
Right.
everybody rotated, they're finding themselves acting a little bit on behalf of Congress and having a lot to say about the executive branch. But I think, to me, the legislative and executive are kind of one, two, and then the Supreme Court, if things are functioning well, is there to kind of keep things from falling apart and should be more passive if it's going well. But now you look in a president, and it didn't start with Obama, it didn't start with Trump, it started a long time ago. But the number one thing is executive orders, and it was funny. Megan was talking about all the stuff Trump's done. He really hasn't passed anything through Congress.
Right.
The one big beautiful bill, a couple of small things, the tax cuts, but other than that, everything he's done is via executive order, which is what Biden did, which is what Obama did, and all they do is keep undoing all that. But they're also using the emergency powers a lot. They are all doing that. So they're using these loopholes, and that's creating problem. And I think there's one other thing, and then I'm going to stop, and I want to hear kind of what you think so far. But I think the other problem is, I think this is a significant problem, and this is something that Trump talked about. I don't think there's been any noticeable movement. Doge was going to save, a couple hundred million, 2 billion, whatever. I think it was 2 billion, and now they're at 20 million, 200 million, whatever. But they didn't get there. I think part of what's causing the problem is it wasn't intended to have the Department of Education, the EPA. We can go down the list of, the thousand probably departments and organizations that have bloated the government that are also creating spending decisions and creating budgets. And they've got people, and then they've got power that they've usurped from other pieces of the government. So I think the bloated government with all these agencies and departments of whatever are complicating it as well. But I think it's again, I don't know who caused the problem. We could probably go do research and figure it out. I think Congress has given up some power, maybe unintentionally, and the executive branch is taking the power. And in the middle, I believe Congress has become a bystander rather than the participatory entity that they're supposed to be. It's like they sit back and complain about it, but they're passive. And I think some of that is even how the elections are run, and they're in this constant reelection cycle of not pissing off your voters if you take a stand on something. So anyway, that's a lot of what I see as the very high level how it's screwed up. Curious your thoughts on all that.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned executive orders because President Trump has, for the most part, presided via executive order. What we have to bear in mind is those are not laws. They are not guaranteed funding. They basically were intended for the president to be able to administer the programs that have been funded by Congress, that sort of thing. And he should have that right as the chief executive to issue orders to how those various and sundry governmental programs are to be run.
I think that word's a key word. It's a how mechanism.
Right, exactly. And now in terms of how these things over the years, not just during the Trump administration, going back probably several, I would say several
It goes
administrations,
way back. It
is
goes back further than I thought it did. When you look at who started it, it's been going on a long time.
and the bottom line is Congress can control that because all they have to do is make sure there's no funding
Yep.
available for any of the changes that are being made or any things that are being added. Here's what I think has happened, and this has happened, I'm going to say, in the last 20 years. Okay. Post, I will say post George Bush anyway, but that's not to say that it didn't occur a little bit during the Clinton administration, and it has happened before. But Congress, too many members of Congress, depending upon who's in the White House and which party you happen to represent in Congress, they are kowtowing to the president, especially if it's a very strong and well liked president, at least among his constituents and that sort of thing. And therefore, presidents such as Obama, to a certain extent, Biden, certainly Donald Trump, have been able to pretty much demand whatever they wish. And the congressional leadership, because it happens to reside with whatever party is in charge of the executive branch, they capitulate
Mhm.
and say, yeah, because otherwise I look like a bad Democrat or I look like a bad Republican. It looks like I don't support Obama. It looks like I don't support Trump. And we've just seen recently in the state of Texas, I don't understand it, but that's another podcast, how you can completely turn an election on its ear with a change in who you support if you're the president, you know? So
But
I
it
think
also
that's part of
there's
where
another
that
aspect of it too that I think all that is true, and this again is a whole nother podcast. But the money that's being because it's a couple things. You're in a continual reelection cycle. If you don't
right,
get on the committee, you won't get any kind of election funding. So you have to go along to get along. And then you've got to get on a committee so that you can get funding to be reelected. If you step out of line, you get ousted. And money, it's so evident. And I'd heard numbers, and Megan Kelly went into details of it on the other side of it. But I'd heard Thomas Massey on something before the election that election would generally have had $500,000 spent to win that
mhm,
election. The what was it? It was the Israeli one of the Israeli lobbies, I don't remember which one, spent $35 million
hmm,
on that election.
hmm,
Shockingly, Thomas Massey got beat.
right.
500,000, they went in there and dumped 35 million in that. And so and again, that's a whole different podcast, and we'll get into some of that with some of the other things I know we're gonna talk about,
Right.
but that's causing problems because I do think you're right of the House and the Senate are just they're so in lockstep with, uh, especially with the way they all line up right now. They're either way in lockstep or they're just arguing all the time doing nothing, but it's
Right.
along party lines. There's no discussions about doing anything logically. It's strictly along party lines. If you're on the same party as the president, you're going to let him do what he wants to do. So now you're going to flip House, midterms at least, and maybe Senate, and then all you're going to do is bring up all kinds of charges on him for the
And
next
if
10
you're
years.
if you're in the other party, you're gonna oppose everything that comes
That's
from
right.
the other side of the aisle or from the president, doesn't matter
Or
what it
you're
is.
John Fetterman and you get locked out. I mean, he's the only one. I literally, to me, the only person other than maybe, it was funny. They were Megan and Sean were talking about it. Maybe Rand Paul, but
Yeah.
other than Rand Paul and John Fetterman, I don't know of anybody else. Thomas Massey probably as well, is why he just got sent on his way. But there's a handful throughout all of Congress that actually think and don't necessarily just throw in with their party lines.
Well, you know, we may come up or at least raise some issues still here tonight about maybe some ways to rein some of this in via term limits.
Yeah,
And we'll leave that alone for right now and get to that. I will tell you this, and it's interesting that you mentioned Rand Paul because, as you know, I am very much a libertarian and have kind of been in line with their political philosophy for 30 years. I don't have a party. I certainly don't usually have a candidate, but that's
yeah.
beside the point. Philosophically, politically, I can align with that. And looking at it through my libertarian eyes, I go back to the original intent, or at least as I understand it, of the framers of our Constitution when they came up with the three branches of government. And they realized even that there would be places where the authorities would overlap, but they even built into the process ways where those could be worked out. And, you know, the president, for example, can veto any law that comes across. Okay. But it can go back to Congress, and with a two-thirds majority vote, they can override the veto. So it's really genius, I think, that something that was established 250 years ago, primarily under the shadow of King George, is still applicable and still works 250 years later. So I think that's absolutely brilliant. But you already touched on it, but I just want to go back through it again. If you go back to what the Constitution says, not what we have turned our government into, you're right. The legislature has the greatest amount of certainly of impact. Maybe I don't want to say power because it's supposed to be balanced,
Right.
but certainly the greatest impact. They make laws. Okay. The president can't make laws. The Supreme Court certainly doesn't.
They're not
They
supposed to.
control they control funding.
Mhm.
Okay. They can declare war. Nobody else can. And they can withhold funding for skirmishes if they choose to do so, by the way. They have to confirm the presidential appointments and they ratify any treaties that he chooses to enter into. And that's it. But that's a lot of power. That is a tremendous amount of power and control.
Yep.
Now, the executive branch, as you have stated, they're the executives. They're the ones that are supposed to take the laws and make that Congress has
Execute.
passed
It's that
and
word, right?
execute it.
Executive, it's
Exactly,
execute. It's the
execute.
basis of that word.
And if there is a manner in which those laws can be executed in a more efficient manner, in a more economic manner, that's okay. I don't think we have the right to question the executive, providing they are following through on their constitutional obligations
Right.
to execute the laws that have been passed, not to ignore them, not to change them. And it
Like
is
them or
not their
not.
job to, and they're not even permitted, or it is not their role to interpret them.
That's right.
That is not their role. That's the job of the Supreme Court.
That's right.
Obviously, the president is the commander in chief of the military. It does not mean he makes military decisions.
Right.
It means he ensures that those decisions, which he makes in conjunction with his military leadership, are carried out,
That's
that
right.
they're properly funded, that they have that sort of thing. Obviously, foreign policy, to me, for a president, that is where he or she can make the biggest impact as an individual, because
True.
that then comes down to negotiating skills,
Mhm.
personality, those kinds of things. And then he appoints federal officials, judges, Supreme Court, that sort of, but that all still has to be approved. He's simply
Yeah.
making the appointment. There's no guarantee. And of course, he can veto. We mentioned that. He can reject the decisions of Congress, although they then have a way to come back. If two-thirds of them disagree with the president's veto, it becomes law. The judicial branch, and I'm glad you mentioned it, the Supreme Court catches a lot of flack. They really do. And people say it's become too politicized. It has always been politicized. The president in power makes those appointments.
That's right.
The beauty of the framers, though, and I know some people get frustrated with this, was that these are lifetime appointments. So those people are going to serve across multiple administrations. And even President Trump has discovered that some of what he thought were his most conservative justice appointments have not agreed with him.
And it's good. I
And
think
I
that's a good
and I
thing.
and I will tell you, I trust our Supreme Court justices. I don't
Yeah,
always agree with them,
I
but I
agree.
trust them. I think to the best of their ability, within the context of, yes, we all have certain biases, but I think that they are doing their best to try to properly interpret the Constitution
I think they're the
and make those
closest
decisions.
thing in all of government right now that is functioning as close, not perfectly, but as close to its original intent as anything.
Right, right. No, I agree. I get frustrated. Sometimes I think our justices get a little lazy.
Yeah.
I don't think that they do the work that they should, but I think their intent is correct. And the nice thing about it is, as much as lifetime appointments may frustrate people, it's a whole lot better than them changing with every administration
Yeah.
or being elected like so many of our judges at the state and local levels are.
Yep.
So, completely agree. Every federal judge that is appointed and approved is there for life,
Yeah.
not just the Supreme Court, but all of our federal judges. I guess, is that a federal it's a retired federal judge making the Sorsby decision, isn't it?
Yes. I think
If
that's
I'm
right.
not mistaken, but anyway, so those and if we would hold each of those branches of government to doing only those things as they are articulated, I think we could almost ensure the balance of power. Now, I know there are those out there that are gonna disagree with me and say, "Well, the government is just a whole lot running a government is a whole lot more complicated than that." You can't cut that back to just doing that. Yes, you can. The only reason governing the United States is difficult does not have anything to do with the growth in numbers or the expanse in terms of geography. We have, I think, deliberately made it difficult to ensure the longevity of our politicians.
Yeah. I agree.
I'm sorry, I don't think it has to be that difficult. And I think we have either created it by not watching. We, kind of like the gerbil that is fed, they've always said a gerbil will grow to the size of his cage. A government will grow to whatever size we make the food, meaning the financial resources available for them to grow. And I think that's what's happened. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I think that's one of the things that gets in the way of the argument about term limits. I hear the argument so much from the other side, and obviously I am for term limits, that, oh, you just can't learn how to maneuver your way through the processes of getting a bill through Congress without having at least 8, 10 years of experience. Then you've made it way too complex. So anyway, if we could return to that, and I don't know how we do it though. How do you put the genie back in the bottle?
Yeah, I think, and it's a lot of people say too, you can't run whether it's a company or the government, you can't run it like your personal finances. I'm not sure I agree with that. When you don't have any more money, you should quit spending money. I think that's a good rule in companies. I think that's a good rule in the government. I think it's pretty simple, and I think it travels pretty well.
Mhm.
And I think because money does control everything from college sports to the government to it's kind of the root in the middle of a lot of these things. I think the budgeting process, and this is something that I've thought about and looked at before, and I spent more time looking at it. I don't know what the mechanism to get this to happen is, and I think the problem is once you've overspent, be it in a household, in a business, in the government, somebody has to be the bad guy and walk in and say, okay, Dave Ramsey's words, we're going to eat rice and beans and rice for a while until we get this worked out. Well, the problem is you can do that in your household. Your kids might not like you a whole lot, but you can do it. You can do that in a company, but man, in the government, it's hard because once you got everybody, congressional approval in this country as a entity is probably low single digits. But I like mine. Katie Britt's doing a great job
Yeah,
of getting
right.
us
Mhm.
ours. Richard
Right,
Shelby, there's a lot of buildings on Redstone Arsenal named after him because he got us ours. So
right,
each group, if you have a really good, senator or congressperson, man, and they're getting you yours in this screwed up game, you like it.
right.
So who steps in and says, well, Huntsville, it sucks, but we're going to have to cut a lot of these things going on in the arsenal. And, hey, Des Moines, Iowa, we got to cut this thing you're doing. Nobody likes that. And in this perpetual reelection game we're playing, I don't know how you put emphasis back on the money and the budgeting. I think that's where it starts, though. And I think that Congress having the power of the purse, the House specifically being close to the people, something has got to happen there. And I've thought this for a while. They've given up the power of the purse for everything we talked about. The executive branches in all these other departments and everybody else are spending a lot of money that is not specifically going through Congress. I don't know how
Right.
it happens. That's confusing to me. How does this $1.8 billion, this stupid slush fund that's being talked about right now, how does that even happen? I think there's a lot of things that are happening that I don't understand in the framework of how it's laid out, how it even is able to happen. But I think part of if we just go back, and I like to make things pretty simple, kind of how did it fall apart and then how do you fix it? You've hit on it, I've hit on it a little bit, but the presidents are proposing too much of the budget framework and how that looks, especially with all the departments and all the different pieces. And those are all being shaped. The president's not doing that's being shaped by the Department of War and the Department of Agriculture and all these different pieces. So it's kind of a bottoms up that they want all theirs and it never shrinks. We
Right.
talked about the emergency powers that were being used. Those things never are used for an emergency and go back away. They stay in forever. So it just
Mhm.
continues. Everything tends toward chaos. And that's exactly what happens with spending in the government, I think. But Congress, I believe, once the budgeting discussion happens, they're not starting from what they believe is right. They're starting from the president's point of view and what he's presented. Instead of them having, here's what we think the budget is, they have the power of the purse. They should know what the budget is. You got the Congressional Budget Office, you got plenty of different people to put together what should the budget be. But they don't start from there. They start from what the executive branch has put together and start that's their beginning negotiation point. I think that's a problem. The accountability, we talked about that, the procedural discipline around all that. And ultimately you continue, presidents do submit a budget to the Office of Management and Budget each year, but it's just a checkbox. It's not really being done. It's
Right.
kind of symbolic. It's mostly ignored. And what's really happening is everything is continuing resolution and these omnibus bills, and the process is not being followed. It's
Mhm.
just being usurped. And so, I think we've hit on some of why a lot of that happened. The complexity of the modern government with all these departments hasn't helped. The political incentives to get reelected, the media, the emergency powers that get put in place and they stay. But I think I think we've got to figure out how to get that piece back in check. I think that's the one tool that was set up that was pretty brilliant. And it also goes really close to making laws because you have to fund when you make the
Right,
laws. So
right.
again, instead of letting yes, the president's got to have a budget. They've got to go through it. The Office of Management budget's got to receive the budget from the president. But to me, that's okay. Here's the executive branch is what they think it's going to take to execute it. Okay, now we're going to go over here, and Congress is going to put together a budget based on what they believe it is, and then you start meshing the two together. That whole
Mm,
process doesn't happen anymore. And I think
right.
part of it is you can't even get three people to work together from two parties. I don't know how that would work. I mean, I watch these.
Mhm.
We've talked about it. You know, the Loss of Decorum podcast. They can't even have civil communications about anything. So how they're really going to? It's what we just talked about. It's so partisan between Republicans and Democrats and what they're going to fight over with a budget. I mean, goodness gracious, you see it every time they government shut down. So how would they really build a bottoms up budget and create one? I think you'd have to go back and look at the makeup and what Congress is charged with right now. I think it would be very hard to do, but I think that has to be a big part of the fix of this. I know we're going
Right.
to segue in a minute into term limits, and maybe that's how you flip that. But I think the procedural piece has got to change back to the way it was intended is the budgeting process and Congress has got to they got to get the power of the purse back.
Let me tell me this. I very well could be wrong. It would not be the first time and won't be the last. But I don't recall that, at least constitutionally, in any of the first three articles of the Constitution, that it is the responsibility of the president or his cabinet to create a budget. That lies with the different departments that they may head, that they may, but they are to guide, they are to give administrative and executive guidance to that. But I think you're right. I think a lot of that is emanating from either a president, and I'm not just talking about our current president,
Yeah,
any
yeah.
president who has certain little special items that he wants included in the budget. I think far too much of the budget is starting at the top and working its way down. And I'm
Yeah, and I
not
think
sure that that's what was intended.
well, and if you look at the power of the purse, how what is Congress's vehicle? What do they tie it to? Well, it should be laws. I mean,
Right.
they should be funding laws and
Right.
things they've
Exactly.
made. So if you strip this thing way back and say, okay, we are gonna throw the baby out with the bathwater for a minute. We're gonna kill all departments of and education, EPA, kill all that for a minute. Before it was there, my guess is I don't know, but we could probably go figure out. My guess is how it worked is they looked at what laws were on the books and what needed to be funded, and that's how it got funded. And then the problem is you create all these departments and then you got emergency powers, you create another thing. Well, each one of those little bureaucracies has to fund itself and none of them shrink over time. So then they start requesting more money and asking for more money. I mean, that's how the palm works in the Department of Defense. It's they're building their budget and it comes from all the little pieces and parts and they build
Mhm.
well, that's one significant piece of it. But the Department of Agriculture is doing the same thing, the Department of Education, all these different government entities that didn't exist in the beginning, they're creating their own little budgets. And when you look at the things they're doing, there's no law that's tied to half the stuff they're doing. Probably 85% of the things they're doing. It's just to sustain their bureaucracy. It's not
But
execution of a law.
and I will tell you that we have the process already in place constitutionally in the way that our government is formed to stop that, but we don't. Because once again, let's say the president issues an executive order. Congress can say, fine, there's no money.
Right.
You can invoke the Emergency Powers Act, and Congress can still say, we're not funding it.
That's right.
Sorry. So go out there on the street and try to raise the money. Now, I'm assuming that as our chief executive, within the framework of the administrative side of our government, the executive side of our government, perhaps he has the right to pull things from one area and move them into another from the executive administrative side of things. I don't think that requires congressional approval. I know he can close down a particular program and he has the right, he has the authority to do that without having to go to Congress for approval, unless it was one that was established by law. So, but that would really curtail a lot of this. The thing is, Congress has got no balls, and I mean that,
No, I agree.
figuratively. But therein, I think, and so I think as we maybe segue into the concept of term limits, I think some of this, my belief, is actually driven by the fact that on the legislative side, I don't worry so much about the executive side, but on the legislative side, you can have people who are so entrenched in that process, which is probably the most powerful of the three that have equal power or that balance the power. And when you've got people, and when you reward that longevity, which is the way the system works, it's not the way the Constitution says it has to work, it's the way the system works, then you can get basically a scenario in which everybody is looking out for their own best interests, whatever that may require. And if I can grow my little fiefdom and the area that my committee that I happen to chair is in charge of, I am even more firmly entrenched. So here's what I'd like to, term limits is something that gets kicked around every year. There are people that think they should be in place, others who say absolutely not, et cetera. I just went out and looked up some facts. Okay. This is nothing but stats. And people can draw their own conclusions. I'm not sure that I've drawn all of my conclusions from it, but 63 of the original members of Congress, when this nation was founded, went on to serve more than one term. 93% of current members of Congress have served more than one term. So that's a pretty good increase. Now, it's like everybody is looking to serve that second term, third term, fourth term, etc. But here's something that I also found very interesting. In the early 20th century, the average tenure of a member of the Senate was less than 5 years, which is interesting because that's less than the 6 years you were elected
That's right.
to serve. In the early 21st century, our current century, it has risen to 11.2 years, which is a little bit less than two full terms. Now, in the House, in the early 20th century, the average tenure of a member of the House of Representatives was 3 years. It is now 8.6 years. Whatever those numbers may or may not mean, it seems to show that there is a trend on the part of politicians to stay in their positions of power, of political power, in their offices longer for whatever reasons. Okay. I did find it interesting that in the history of this nation, 250 years, we've had 122 members of Congress that have served more than 36 years. But here's what's interesting. All 10 of the longest serving senators and 9 of the top 10 longest serving representatives have all been in this century, in the
Yeah.
21st century, between 2000 and 2026 or 25.
You know why?
So that, if nothing else, it tells us that there is a trend. What we now have, and this isn't news to anyone, is professional representatives and professional senators, and we know that there have been professional bureaucrats. We kind of accepted that, but we now have people going into congressional leadership in this country where that's
I think it's
almost all they
simple.
know.
I think
They
it's
don't know
simple.
anything else.
Well, I think it's simple why. I think a friend of mine that I used to work with, he's like you, he's a libertarian. He knows the Federal Reserve and the banking system better than anybody I
Oh,
know. Knows the
wow.
Constitution very well. I've had a lot of good conversations with him, and he pointed out in the founding documents, it says that the representatives, Congress shall go vote. I think it's twice a year, whatever. So what does that tell you? That tells you that they didn't want to because they had a farm, they had a ranch, they had a
Right.
job. So it was a sacrifice. Because if you put words in like you shall, that means nobody wanted to and you're going to enforce it. And you just backed up with stats. They didn't even make it a full term a lot of times.
Mhm.
Now you can't run them the heck out of there. So the original intent and the original people that did it for obviously a number of decades, many decades until kind of recent years, it was a sacrifice.
Right.
It wasn't self enrichment. It was a sacrifice for your nation. You're going to go represent your district. You're going to go be a senator and you're going to serve your term and you're going to go back to your freaking job.
Right.
Well, along the way, and I think it's so easy to see right now, and you can pick the most famous case, but you can go pick pretty much all of them, is Nancy Pelosi. She's worth 300 and something $1 million, and if you just make it simple math, she's making 150,000 a year and has made a little less than that probably over time. The math doesn't math.
Right.
So, you've got campaign finances that they used to be able to keep when they quit running for a while. That got changed. I know Richard Shelby was one of the last ones where he got to keep his war chest and take it with him and do as he saw fit.
Right.
That's changed. But the insider trading is just an absolute no brainer to me. And the dumbest thing, Congress isn't going to fix itself, but that has to be demanded to be fixed. You cannot tell me how in the world you look at that and say it's right when you got people that go in and they're ordinary walking around Joes and Janes and they come out worth millions of dollars, making 150 grand a year.
Mhm.
Well, why can you not get them to leave? Because of that. When you're sitting there and you are making laws and you know what's happening and you know what you're about to pass and it's going to affect an industry and a company and you're allowed to short it or go invest in it. And I mean, Nancy Pelosi, and I think it's funny. Why is she quieting down and not saying much? I think she finally realized she had enough. And it's like, just sit back and keep doing it as long as you can. I guess 320 million or whatever she's got now was the point. But anybody that can look at that one exam, she's the poster child for it. But it is a bipartisan. We've talked about this before. Anytime it's like the votes on funding Ukraine during the Biden administration, they were bipartisan. Well, that bothers me. It makes me feel like they're getting something because nothing's bipartisan. Well, it's pretty bipartisan what's going on with this insider trading right now, and it's well documented. And you got to get it where you know, I don't. Ironically, I used to argue for term limits across the board. Didn't really know what I was arguing for. I don't even think you would need term limits if you fixed the insider trading and did some campaign finance reform. I think it would fix itself because they're not going to go. They got to go get a dang job. They can't. They can't enrich themselves. That said, I do
Right.
wanna dive into term limits because I think that's
No,
a interesting thing too, but I think I look at and I this was not in my notes, I was thinking about it while you're sitting here talking and what I was saying. What changed as you were quoting those statistics, what changed? Insider trading changed. So fix the one thing that is a problem and go back and say, "Don't do that anymore," and you may not even need term limits.
and how did they dare send Martha Stewart to prison?
Oh my god. Yeah.
You know?
She gets to wear an ankle bracelet for something very, very minor, and
Right.
and they're all doing it. I mean, and
Right.
it's just a known fact. You can go trace it. It's happening right now, and shockingly, nobody's really looking into it very hard. They're gonna, "Oh, we'll check in." The shorting of oil and the trading of oil as every Trump ceasefire, no ceasefire, blow up, not billions and billions and billions of
Mhm.
dollars being made on these trades.
Right.
It's the same dang thing.
Mhm.
And nobody's looking into it. So again,
Right.
I do want to talk
So
about
very
term
good
limits, but
point.
I used to. So good friend of mine, Kyle Lanham, I've brought him up on here before, and you and I've talked about him. He's the younger version of Randy. He could be the Dos Equis most interesting guy. He ran a Republican presidential campaign for Mark Sanford, and he and I used to talk a lot about politics. He's much smarter than I am when it comes to politics, and we got into an argument about term limits. We used to talk about them all the time, and finally we got in a big argument about it. And he pointed out something. I'm like, "Oh, you're right. I don't fully agree with that anymore." But he asked me the question of, "Why do you want term limits?" I said, "Well, I want to get the dirty money out of politics. I want the campaign, the campaign finances reformed, the insider trading." He's like, "Okay, I agree with you. I don't think term limits," and it's funny, I need to call him again. I'll call him tomorrow and tell him I've got another thought because I don't think that term limits is the way to fix it. And that's what he challenged me on. He said, "I don't think you're trying to fix a problem that didn't used to exist by doing something that I don't even know you need to fix." And we never had more of the conversation, but as we sit here and flesh this out, I think the real problem is not them staying too long for no reason. I think you got to fix the root of the reason. And what he said around the term limits, and it's kind of my take on term limits because I just said across the board. Well, and if I go back and look, the House was absolutely, that's the representative, that's the people, that's voted on by the people. But the Senate was originally appointed; it wasn't even elected. And
Mm.
so, and it comes out of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And that's Kyle's the first one I really talked to a lot about that, where the Senate is the House of Lords, meant to bring stability and not jump all over the place. And to your point of, eh, because it is a valid argument of it shouldn't be so difficult. He brought up a really good point is if you do term limits on Senate and you make it a short amount of time, you're going to end up with unelected bureaucrats running the entire government because those people will still be there throughout multiple sets of term limited people, which is probably worse than having senators there forever. So where I finally landed, and I did a bunch of research around this too, and I think it would be more in line if we said term limits is the right fix with the original intent is absolutely term limit House. That's not that was never intended to be this common steady thing. It was representative of the people. It changes. Maybe if you're going to term limit Senate, it's definitely not as short a time. But I don't think across the board you'd have to do it. I think you could absolutely term limit House and not necessarily Senate. But again, as we've sat here and talked, I think you could fix the freaking money problem and they would all go home naturally.
Yeah. Well, let me follow up on that because I agree with you. If you could find a way to stop basically the way the ability of members of Congress or the executive branch or the Supreme Court from enriching themselves because of insider knowledge, that would shut the spigot off.
Yep.
However, policing that, figuring out how to do that would be so difficult, I think almost impossible. It's like a Brandon Sorsby who says, "Okay, I'll have my brother-in-law place my bets for me under his name, and we'll I mean, it becomes extremely difficult to do that."
By
So,
the way, I feel bad for
here's
that
the
kid, Randy. I had no idea Joel Klatt was talking about it. The number of bets. It's like
yeah,
$90,000 he bet
yeah.
40 times on Indiana. He's got a problem. That's what's
No, he
really
definitely
sad is,
does.
holy cow,
He
I had no
definitely
idea
does.
the magnitude of what he was doing. But yes, to your point, you could fix the big insider trading, when somebody's sitting there trading Lockheed,
Mhm.
Raytheon, Northrop, but when you get 4 or 5 levels removed, I think that gets very difficult.
So, here's where the libertarian I got my libertarian hat on.
I like it.
Actually, it's a Quancano hat, but, anyway,
I've got my liberal hat on.
let me let me let me throw this out at you, and it is pretty radical. Probably not too radical for a libertarian, but here are my suggested changes as it because I am a firm believer in term limits. Because to me, that's easy to police. I don't have to police that. Okay. I just give me a couple of minutes here and then be prepared to fire back as to why this is stupid. But any candidate elected president or vice president or to Congress can serve only one term. And I'll tell you why. There are advantages to this in a second. If they were appointed or elected in a special election to replace someone who had to vacate office without completing their elected term, then they could still serve an additional term if they were elected. So if you went in and you took somebody's House seat for a year, that would not restrict you from then running for an additional term, whatever those terms are. I did say here that if senators who have served one term in the Senate can no longer serve a second, they could run for the House and vice versa, also for one term. Anyone who has served a term as a senator or as a representative could certainly run for president or vice president. That would be fine. I would suggest that no one who has served as president, vice president, or who has served in Congress may be appointed to a federal judgeship. A vice president can serve out the remainder of the term of a president who had to leave office for any reason and thereafter can run for president. Okay. But not for vice president again, which probably they wouldn't do anyway. But okay, now here are my suggested term limits. The president, 1 6-year term. Vice president, likewise, serving with his or her running mate. Senators, 1 6-year term. And the elections for the senator would take place, obviously, every 6 years at the midpoint of the presidential term. So 3 years into a presidential term is when we would elect the Senate, not simultaneously with the president. Representatives would get 1 3 year term. Now, that seems like a real simplification, and I'm sure people could come up with a million reasons why they say that wouldn't work. But let me tell you the advantages. Number one, it eliminates immediately the inordinate power of lobbyists and PACs because the candidate can promise anything going in and they don't have to keep any of those promises because they're not going to be up for reelection. So lobbyists can try to influence votes, but not elections. Okay. And I've got no problem with that. PACs, I don't know. I mean, they represent perhaps a constituency and maybe they can influence decision making, but not elections. The only danger that you would have if you made promises to a PAC and you got elected with their money and you didn't follow through is if you ever tried to run for another office of some sort, it might cause you problems. But okay, secondly, it forces the office holder to spend their time in office doing what they were elected to do, not spending half of their term raising money and trying and running for reelection. Okay. And that period of time that they're running for reelection, raising money is growing exponentially and taking away from them actually doing the job. Those who are in office would no longer have to kowtow to to the wishes of a president out of fear of losing a reelection bid because you can't be reelected. So he can't have any impact whatsoever. Now I can actually listen to my constituents, try to make a sound decision that's based on the best interest of the people of the United States. The other thing that it would do is it would eliminate the extraordinary power, particularly the committee power, usually in the form of a chairmanship, that is bestowed upon the longer serving members of Congress. That would go away because nobody's going to be there for 36 years and have all that inherent power that comes, especially if their party is in control with the chairmanships. I am not going to buy. So don't. If you want to try to make the argument that the government is just too complex and you can't run it adequately with these terms, you go talk to the wall because I am not going to buy that. It is not that difficult. We have made it difficult, and we have used that argument to. I've used that argument to keep myself, in power as a senator. That the if the processes within the Senate are that complex, then simplify them because they were never. I go back to the Constitution, and those guys. You are right. They didn't have time for that kind of complexity. They didn't have time to say, "Oh, I'll give 18 years to the Senate." Because that's what it's going to take. No, they had a farm to run. So, to me, I know once again, I tend to oversimplify things and it's probably full of holes. But just as a voter who is so frustrated, this is what frustrates voters. Nothing ever changes. The reality is, nothing has changed in my life, since about 1968. Nothing significant has changed in the way we govern, in the impact on the individuals. There were some significant changes that took place in the 60s and early 70s in my lifetime. But beyond
Yes.
that, and
Since
I
then,
just don't
it's
see any way
it's
that it's
become
going to
a
change.
well, it's become a uniparty where there's not a lot of difference between Republicans and Democrats, and they're all. And the big change to me is the focus of being. It's a selfish, excuse me, it's a selfish motive of self enrichment versus a
Right.
sacrifice and a service. That's the single switch that flipped is that. And so why do Republicans and Democrats behave shockingly the same? Because they're worried about themselves, not the country.
And you hit the nail on the head there, Carl. Think about when you are in political office, particularly at the federal level, but it's true at the state level as well. What are the two things you have? Money and power,
Yeah.
and money and power, and money and power. And what drives the worst characteristics of humanity: money and a thirst and a lust for money and power. And so, you know,
Yeah,
I,
and
I look
and
at I look at let's take this back into our Christian beliefs, and Satan's made it very clear. What you want is power. You want to be able to make all the decisions yourself. And what's the best way to do that? Through money and wealth.
Yeah.
And we've embraced that politically, and that's why I think a big part of why we're in the mess that we're in and why we're seeing the shift of the balance of power. Within the congressional side, which I still would say has the stronger influence of any of our 3 branches,
As designed, I mean, it was designed that
they
way.
are going to give up some of their power, some of their authority. They're going to concede to the will, as it were, of the executive branch because of basically self-preservation
Yeah.
to make sure that they don't run afoul
I
of
think if you
anything
look at
going on the administrative side.
the root cause of why has Congress given up the power, and I don't think the president usurped that power. I think Congress has given
No,
it
it
up.
was given. It was gladly given.
And I think it's
Okay.
been given for that single reason
Now,
is
I do
it's
think
a
we have
goal
presidents who have recognized that and said, "Okay, great.
opportunistic.
That's
Yes.
a trump card I'm going to play." And I don't mean
There's
that as a
there's absolutely been opportunistic presidents who have watched what Congress has done, and instead of being an institutional, disciplined entity, they have given up power because they're just going along to get along so they can get reelected. And clearly, there are opportunistic presidents who have taken advantage of that through executive order and other things. So, but I think, we asked the question in the beginning all along, and I haven't changed my mind. I believe Congress gave it up. I don't think the executive branch took it, and then the Supreme Court's just
I
kind of the dog that the tail's
agree.
wagging, trying to figure out what they're supposed to do. So I think Congress has got to take it back. I agree philosophically with what you're saying that the easiest way to fix it is term limits. Controlling the money is hard.
Yes.
I don't shy away from doing hard things. What I do believe is
Well,
the
yeah, but
real
you
issue.
don't want to tilt at windmills either.
No, I believe the real challenge is Congress fixing itself. Usually broken organizations don't vote or make decisions to fix themselves, and unfortunately that's what this takes. To do term limits, here's where you can fix it. To do term limits, you've got to have a constitutional convention of the states. And back 6 years ago when I used to listen to Mark Levin, there is a big push for that to happen. And there's a shocking number of states that have agreed. It's still a ways away from ever happening to do a
That sounds like
constitutional
a
convention.
podcast, by the way.
We absolutely could do that, but I think that's the only way you can fix it. I mean, that's the vehicle to go fix Congress. They're not going to vote it on themselves. And I think you got to look at it and say, okay, what would we want to fix? And yeah, I can't. Arguing whether what you said would work or not is arguing hypothetical. I'm sure it would
Right.
work, and there's good reasons, and there's logic by offsetting them, and that's kind of the same arguments I've had. I tend to not like to break things that aren't already broken. I try to fix problems instead of maybe breaking more. So I'm all in on term limits. I don't changing the amount of the terms and all that. Again, it's big muscle movements. I tend to be a little bit Japanese where they like to iterate and do little things on big systems that have been working well for a while, uh, rather than break it and start over. Because I don't think the whole system's broken. I think there's a few small things that have gotten out of control that have exacerbated and made it look like the whole system sucks and it's burned down. Again, it's made it 250 years. As you said earlier, it's a strong system. Megyn Kelly and Sean Ryan were arguing. Sean's gotten cynical and kind of given up on even voting. Megan's trying to talk him off the ledge and said exactly what we were saying earlier. It's a strong system that's survived a lot of good and bad. So when I look at it, I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't go change the presidential term length or Senate or the House. 2 presidential terms, I'm fine with. That one to me doesn't cause the problem. Again, that one seems to take care of itself. You get voted out. They don't do a lot. There's because of the way the House flips and everything else, the president is almost irrelevant. And I think Megyn Kelly had a good point about some of Trump's frustrations right now, and she believes why he's starting to act out on a world stage is he did all of his executive orders, faster than anybody. In 100 days, he's done all this stuff. He shut down the border, which is good. He's done a lot of things through executive order, but then he started realizing he can't really do anything. And he even said it on a hot mic, and she brought this up, and I remember it, that he really can't do a lot because people were complaining about, why haven't you done this? And what he's figured out over, now, 1 term plus the part of this one, the president doesn't have a lot of power. And that's where a lot of people get annoyed with things. Your city council and your state government and your county government has a lot more power over you than he does. And he's figured that out, which I think is hilarious. And she said, I think that's why he's acting out on a world stage is because he's annoyed and he wants to go do something. So now he's just going to go agree with Bibi Netanyahu and blow up, Iran. Uh, so I would set the presidential term limits, all that aside from it, and say it's fine. I think if we talked about it, if we fix Congress, I think it puts the three back in their right buckets. Again, I don't care about the terms. Leave them 6 years, 2 years. I do think if you do, because I think House, again, it is easier for sure. Again, I've argued with Kyle about this quite a bit. Senate it was intended to be the more stable piece. Whether you do 2 term limits or what at 6 years, I'd even be fine with that. I think the House, you could limit that one pretty significantly. Again, where's Nancy Pelosi? Where's some of these people that are camping out forever? Some senators do, and I don't know. You may have it broken down. It feels like the House is doing more of it and staying there forever. But I think a small movement would be fine. The problem I worry about is I agree with what you said. I think there's a flip side of it too, because if you go do those term limits, and this is the piece Kyle brought up before, and I've spent a lot more time thinking about it and did some research, you are going to weaken expertise. Again, it shouldn't be that hard, but that's a fact. You will. The unelected bureaucrats are a real problem. They're going to end up running things. And then the lobbyists, so you are going to destabilize them with what you said for sure. But this is something I heard, I think it was JD Vance on Megyn Kelly's podcast, maybe late last year, early this year. I think it was earlier this year, talking about he was the only senator that was really doing it to a full extent. But what's happening, and I never thought about this, he had a fix, and this is an interesting piece too for the Senate. So I would be in favor of term limiting the House. And then some of the fixes he had for Senate was pay the staff more, because they kill these poor staffers. They give them a budget of X number of dollars. You can hire as many as you want. They're all underpaid. Well, why do people agree to do that? Because they know they'll eventually get to be a lobbyist where they can make the real money. Well, what are the lobbyists doing? Well, the staffers are overworked. Where did the lobbyists come from? I didn't really even know this. A lot of them are staffers who got the chance to be a lobbyist, got the money. Well, who have they got the relationship with? The staffers.
Mhm.
So they go back, and guess who's writing the majority of the laws right now? The lobbyists are, because the staffers are overworked, don't have time. So JD Vance, when he was a senator, was one of the very few, and he was listed as a not trusted senator by the lobbyist, and he said, I wore that with a badge of honor. But he would not allow a lobbyist at all to write any law. And so you've got that whole thing mixed up, and I worry that lobbyists would become even more ingrained, because they're going to be the ones to write. They're doing it right now. I wasn't aware of how active they are in writing laws, because of their role as staffers, get paid as a lobbyist, go back, help staffer write law. So again, that piece worries me a little bit with term limits, if that could happen. But I think campaign finance reform, insider trading, and a mix of term limits. Again, we could do 6 more hours on the exact way to do it. I think, first of all, how do you do term limits? Well, we got to get a convention of states. That's the only way to actually enact that. So although it's simple in theory, I think getting that to happen is tough. Campaign finance reform could absolutely happen a different way. That doesn't take a convention of states. You could do campaign finance reform, and that simply comes back to our voice. Go beat the hell out of your senators and Congress people to put in place. It's been introduced a number of
Yeah,
times
but
to the House and the
Charles,
Senate.
nobody would know this better than you because your grandfather was part of the CIA. You think you can't fund campaigns surreptitiously and no
Oh,
one knows it?
100%. Again,
Here's
not to say
I was
that you can't, but you've gotta take steps. In the campaign finance reform, you can absolutely do something. Doing nothing because it's hard, I'm not a fan of saying
true.
we're not doing. And the other thing is the insider trading. There, in publicly traded companies, that's very easy to control. If you can find it, if you can catch Brandon Sorsby, and Vegas can out him because he was betting through his, they can figure out insider trading. And again, will it be perfect?
Cincinnati outed him. Let's not kid ourselves.
They might have. I don't know.
Or University of Texas. I'm not sure who.
Could have both.
I will say this, if you my problem is this, and the reason I'm such a, I'm so insistent on term limits. If you allow people to be reelected, then there is no way to do away with the fruit of the poisonous tree. You just can't. There is always going to be there shouldn't be lobbyists, okay? Now, if you say that, that right now that the staff members of our politicians, the bureaucrats, are basically running the country and writing the laws, I'm sorry, that's laziness on the part of Congress, and that's laziness on the part of the cabinet members who are heading up these organizations. And if you can't run it any better than that, then you shouldn't be in that position. You know what's going on in your company. You set policies, you set procedures, you expect those to be followed. And while somebody might cheat here and there, eventually you know you're going to catch them. And most of the time, it's not going to be an issue because of the example that you set as the CEO. Do things honestly, by the book, fairly, with integrity. And that's what your employees are going to do. I'm sorry, that's the responsibility of Congress, and that's the responsibility of the members of the president's cabinet. And if you can't do it, you got no business telling us as taxpayers what we can and cannot do. And so that, yeah, that may be hard for congressional leadership. That might be hard for a representative but and to say that they don't know how to write a law, sure they do. Give me a break. Most of them are attorneys,
Yeah,
and they
I
didn't get
don't
into
think
this
anybody's saying they don't know how. I think it gets back to what you said earlier. Part of the reason they're not is because what are they doing? They're out
because
campaigning.
they're running for reelection,
That's right.
raising money.
And their staffers are running their office.
Right, right, which is sad,
Mhm.
but I think you're absolutely right. That's exactly where we are,
So I think it's a
and
both and. I mean, I think again, I'm still a fan of term limits, not maybe as drastic as you are. I think that again, I'm not a fan of giving up because things are hard. I love doing hard things.
it's not just because they're hard. Maybe the way we've done it is wrong,
No, I'm
and
saying
maybe
term
it's
limit.
time
I'm
to
saying term
acknowledge.
limits. I'm not saying give up on term limits. That's going to take longer than what some campaign finance reform would, and some insider trading. All
Well, it
that
could
takes is
happen, like
enough
you said.
people with voices get together and say, "By God, you're going to do it." And you call your senator and your Congress people and demand because these bills have been put forth. It's been going on recently where they're putting them forth to limit insider trading, all this stuff. Shockingly, they never make it anywhere. They never even hardly make it out of a committee. Well, I think we demand that that's going to happen. That's easier immediately to do than term limits. And I think again, start working on the convention of states and put some term limits in place. I'm still a fan of that.
Yeah, no,
I don't think
I
it
would
has to be that
agree.
radical. I think if you fix some of the money, I think it's a both side. It's a belt and suspenders. I think either one of them would probably fix it. I don't think either one of them is more right than the other one. A combination of the two, I bet your statistics would look a lot like the statistics did back in the 1800s for how long people stayed in Senate and Congress. If you took the money out of it and you wouldn't even have to worry about the term limits, people would probably not finish out their term because again, paying them 150,000 or whatever the heck they're making right now, They've got they probably would not wanna live in DC because you can't live in DC for
Right.
$150,000 and live any kind of decent life. So they're probably gonna wanna go back and work. So they're probably not even gonna end up staying their term. You
Well,
get
I
them the heck out of
understand.
DC.
I read that historically, that's one of the reasons that there were not, in the early stages of this country, representatives and senators who wanted to stay in office because they hated Washington, D.C. It was a mosquito infested malaria factory
Yep.
there. It was a horrible place to live. They would much rather be on their plantation in Virginia. And so they didn't want to stay. And you're right. If you took away the financial incentives, I think that kind of a big part of it. But I don't see why should somebody be reelected?
Uh,
Nobody has ever made that case for me, ever.
yeah, again, I
Why?
don't have a
And
significant
if the answer is because government is so hard, that's our fault. That's not
there
necessary.
is something though, and again, I'm not willing to throw out what the founders did 'cause I think it's worked for 250 years. So I think again, the problem is not somebody being reelected. It's how long they're staying and looking at why. Because the reason the original term limits were put in place and what they allow to do was you do need stability. Again, forget the whether it's hard or not. There is something to be the reason we're not a direct democracy is stability. And so
Mhm.
having stability and continuity is important. Again, yes, I don't think anybody should be there for 36 years or anything else, but there was a reason they did what they did. So reelection, again, the problem is when you're running a reelection campaign, as soon as you get elected, that's a problem. That's not a
Right,
product of somebody getting reelected. That didn't used to happen. Again,
right.
you could be reelected for 250 years now, It's recently where they put so much energy in it because of the money involved. It's a high stakes game
But
because your
unfortunately,
first term, you're not
candidates
going to get any. Your second term, where you're going to get something, and then your third term. So they're worried. It's like an NFL contract. Your first one doesn't do any good. You got to get your second one to make money. It's like your reelection is when you start making money.
well, and I would agree to allowing people to serve maybe 2 terms, except for the fact that candidates these days do not have to pass a character test. If
Well,
they
that's a whole
did,
different discussion.
95% of them would fail miserably.
Well, they say
Politics today does not
we get the
politics
leadership
today
we
does not attract the brightest and the best of us. It
well
just
we
does not.
the problem is think about society. It's often said that we get the leaders we deserve.
You're right. You're right.
What do most households look like? They're broke, living paycheck to paycheck. So what do? Elect a bunch of idiots that don't know how to run finances. So I
Mhm.
think I think it's a that's a bigger that's a 4 different podcasts of a society, the decline of the moral fabric of society, but it's hard to hold others accountable when we can't hold ourselves accountable.
Absolutely. Preach on. So anyway, I think we've covered a lot of good stuff. We've certainly raised, again, as we typically do,
Yeah.
issues. I'm not sure we have certainly haven't come to all of the
I think we've
answers,
got some
but
solutions, and I think there are some of them that are being discussed with people that could make a difference.
right.
You know,
Well,
I don't think any of
I'm
them as
glad.
radical as either thing you or I either one said, but the good news is not not our podcast yet, but many others, and information is out there, and people are seeing
Right.
what just happened with Thomas Massey. You know, even 5 years ago, that information, you might have been able to get it, but it took some research.
Right.
Again, the
Right.
amount of podcasts that are out there, the amount of information, now you gotta be smart enough to discern it and figure out what's what and whether aliens are real or not. I mean, you gotta sort through a jungle to the truth. But the fact that right away we knew Thomas Massey could go on a podcast and say, they've raised $35 million to vote me out. More and more
Mhm.
people are it's still a small I think it's still a small piece of our population, but it's more and more people are getting frustrated and have the information to do something with. I'm the eternal optimist. I don't think we're done yet. I don't know that we'll make it another 250, but I don't really care. My kids and I and grandkids will be done by then. So I think it's still a great country. I think there's a lot of goodness. I think it needs to be celebrated, but I think there's a lot of people waking up. Between COVID and some other things and lockdowns and censorship on social media and then Elon buying Twitter. The good news is my mom and I talk about this and probably once a week we say it. The good news is God's still in control and he's got a plan for
Absolutely.
this country
Right.
and the world. And I think this country's still more good than bad. And I think God's got some plans for it. And I believe, and Megan said this, I think out of the presidents we've had that have not been centrist, I've talked about this probably since Bill Clinton. They've been maybe W and HW, but they were just big government guys who they were spend everything, got us in financial problems. So if you look at a fiscally responsible centrist, albeit some broken moral issues, Bill Clinton was probably the last one we've had. No matter what Trump said about shrinking the government, the budget hasn't shrunk. We're going into debt faster. Everybody doubles the one before him and Kim complains about the other one. But I do believe there's enough people, you know, I've probably been out as libertarian as much as anything, but I'm a centrist. Some things I probably lean a little bit of left of center, some things a little right of center. And I think the vast majority of this country is somewhere, a standard deviation or so of center. And it's still possible that somebody's going to rise out of the center. And a lot of people thought it was going to be Trump, right, wrong, or indifferent. I think they've been proven wrong overall that he was going to be that. He said that the things he was saying, that's why he became this populist candidate. He was saying what everybody was frustrated with. He seemed to represent the people. He seemed to be a centrist, and again, some of his policies are, but a lot of things he's doing now with wars and other things are not. But that's the reason he became a freaking apprentice real estate guy and became president is because people are dying to have somebody who appears to be a centrist on some things policy wise. So I'm still optimistic that we're gonna win this thing eventually.
Well, I think if nothing else, the American populace may be now, or they're beginning to realize that they are exhausted with all of this. and I don't think that the energy is there to maintain these wide swings from left to right.
Yep.
And I think that the sheer exhaustion is going to force the people are gonna force everything to stop in the center for a while.
It kinda happened with all the trans stuff, all that. I mean, that's why you're seeing that. People are just tired of it.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
just like, why are we even talking about it? And I do think you're right. I mean, I think the people are demanding that we pull because we did that. We talked about this for a long time. If if H.W. Bush, and Clinton were such close friends, I don't think they were as far apart as Obama and Trump are. You know, again, they were oscillating kind of the center. They were a few degrees either side of center, and we've done that for many, many years in this country. And now we've started these wild swings, and I think your terminology is exactly right. I think people are tired and sick of it. And I think that's why you're seeing this insanity with some of the left that all this stuff. It's like, why are we even talking about it? We've got legitimate problems where we got potholes in our roads and we got some issues we need to fix here. And we're talking about, whether boys can become girls. Like, what are we talking about? And I think that just people being beat down and tired of it, again, I think that gave rise to Trump. The good news is I think some of that
And to
stuff's
give
dead.
and to balance that a little bit, I think everybody's sick and tired of hearing about the wall and the border.
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
do,
Well,
because there's not a lot
the
of
border's
proof. There's
fixed. I
not
mean,
a lot of
the
proof that that is
well,
that that
well,
should
the whole
take
thing
the
is
energy and the money that
it
it's taking.
didn't. Well, and that's what's crazy. The border got fixed. Again, there's one thing that you really can't argue with, and nobody really is. Biden opened the border and you had 25 million or whatever the number is come through. Now the problem is trying to sort out who's here and not. That's not easy. But as far as the numbers coming in, that got fixed in a few days. And the whole time Biden said Congress had to act, that got fixed by doing what we said, the executive branch executing the law, which means you got to have a secure border. That got fixed. That was pretty easy. So the rhetoric around some of these things is actually pretty easy if you just execute the law that already exists. And that's a problem too, is
Yeah,
a
well,
lot of
then
the laws, the presidents are and Trump's doing it, they all do it. They selectively enforce the laws they like.
why then, if it's fixed, why does every political ad emanating from the state of Nebraska from the Republican side say, protecting the border, protecting the border, protecting the border, protecting the border. If it's fixed, it's fixed.
Well,
Why even bring it up?
what I've
Because
seen though
I'm
is
tired of hearing about it.
the problem,
I'm
Randy, is it is fixed. Go border. You can look at the statistics. There's nobody coming across. I mean, you can look at the pictures, but what happens is, and I've seen it in Alabama, you see people run on whatever Trump ran on. They think it works. So if you just repeat what he said a year and a half ago, it'll get you elected. It's so ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what
well,
they're
and they
doing
gotta
now.
be careful because I don't think that there's gonna be any really strong coattails to ride to an election, and so, be careful
We'll
what you
see.
wish for out there,
He's
guys.
just
If
primaried a
that's
bunch
all
of
you've
people.
got if that's all you've got is, "I'm with Trump 100%,"
It's
what,
pretty lazy.
you're not capable of thinking yourself, right?
It's pretty lazy. Unfortunately, they're
Yeah.
running a playbook that's working. He just primaried a bunch of people, the people
Well,
he
it's
supported.
Alabama. It's
No, it's not
Alabama.
just
George
Alabama.
Wallace could come back tomorrow and be elected in
No,
Alabama.
I'm not talking about Alabama. Go look around the nation at what just happened to some of these primaries. He endorsed a lot of people. He got Thomas Massey primaried. I mean, a lot of these guys he's
Well,
helped get primaried. So it's back to what we talked about before of incentivizing bad behavior. Bad behavior is being incentivized because he's endorsing them, and then they just say, "Yeah, what Trump said," which again is back
if
to
you
what
did
we were saying earlier of the House and Senate not doing their job, even in the
if you
elections, they're not.
if you only had a one-term president and one-term congressman, you wouldn't have this problem.
Maybe. So should we do what every other media show and podcast and everything else does and say we might have something really exciting coming up that we can't talk about? That makes everybody want to check what's going on.
I think that would be a
That's what
true
every other
statement.
host does, right? Is that we got
Yeah,
something really
yeah,
cool coming up.
and
We can't talk about it, but
right,
we might have
right.
an interview coming up that's pretty exciting. So more to come,
Yes,
right?
absolutely, yeah.
So it
Hey,
turns
that's
out
the idea.
somebody's listening because somebody reached out. So there you go. And it wasn't either one of our moms or dads or friends. So
And
somebody
everyone needs to understand that if you've got an issue or an individual that you would like to see involved in a discussion about any topic, let us know.
they've just got to
You
be
can
willing to have a
leave us a
civil
message
discussion and
on the YouTube or whatever on our YouTube channel or whatever, but, yeah,
absolutely
let us know.
reach out. They just got to be willing to have nuanced, respectful discussion, and we can
Right.
we can accommodate. And I mean, eventually we're going to run out of topics. I don't know, maybe not. The world keeps getting
Well, now
crazier, but
football season starts up,
it's true. So it's
and
gonna. We've
we've
only
got
got like
softball to
10 or
carry us
11
for another
weeks.
week.
Yeah, we got 10 or 11 more weeks, but no, I think it's fun. Again, more to come. We'll see as we vet through this, but I've had somebody reach
All
out
right.
that may want us to do an interview on a pretty relevant hot topic. So, yeah, if anybody else
So
happens to
we're
see us
open.
out there in the ether, we're open to pretty much anything as long as it's respectful. And again, that's our if you go all the way back to our very first podcast, that was our intent is just to have
Right.
respectful discussions when we differ and when we don't. And I think we're getting better at that. You know, I could have sat here and argued with you for the next hour on why I think your way of doing term limits is silly, but it doesn't really matter. I think we
Right.
agree on it's back to the 85-15. We don't agree on 10 or 15%,
Right.
but you know, the intent of a lot of it we do. And so I would actually love to see some more people reach out and come on. And again, I'm not very interested in doing family and friends and stuff like that right now. I think it's fun if somebody else organically reaches out, which is the opportunity we've
Yes.
got right now. So we're open.
Sounds good.
All
Looking
right,
forward to it. Hey,
enjoyed it.
this was great. Enjoyed it, and, guns up.
Yes, sir. Hook 'em.